Hey, what's going on, you rascals? Tobin here with you. Thanks for checking out the channel. Much appreciated. Hope everybody's had a fantastic weekend. If you could, subscribe here. Subscribe to the Tobin and Leroy show, which is available for you on the Miami 560 WQAM YouTube page. We stream live every single weekday, 4 hours a day. You guys can interact. You can call in. You can get your Heat questions in, your Dolphins questions in, your Messi questions in. Fun sports weekend down here as we had, the Pinks winning the Leagues Cup championship. I'm learning soccer on the willy-nilly. I didn't even know goalies kicking a penalty kick scenario. That was awesome. Shout out to Drake Callender with the game-winning kick and the game-winning save. I mean, that's badass right there. The UFC last night was a ho-hum card, but obviously a great main event where Sean O'Malley ends up finally winning his championship and knocks out Aljamain Sterling via TKO in round 2. So the UFC always feels like it when they get that new superstar really started. Everybody said this is going to be the next guy, but he kind of needed to do it. Headlining, main event, all this pressure on him, and he did it. So, and apparently did it while being busted up in training camp too. So that was awesome. Dolphins had their second preseason game. Tua led a touchdown drive. Did some jiu-jitsu rolls, so a lot of fun was happening there. But in the midst of all of this, if you are a South Florida fan, you didn't see this, there was one little rumor that was put out there regarding the Heat that was not Damian Lillard related. And it was a report from, I believe it was Vince Goodwill of Yahoo Sports. And Vince is not a guy I think that usually breaks a lot of stories, but I think is known as a pretty credible guy, not a pot stirrer or anything like that. And he had an intriguing, just kind of throwaway line in a Daryl Morey in a column about James Harden and Daryl Morey, because right now that's the craziest standoff that there is right now. You have James Harden calling Daryl Morey a liar, and you have the league apparently going to launch some kind of inquiry into this, which I don't know what they're looking at. Are they looking for, did Daryl Morey actually lie, or what are they looking for? Because apparently the reports are that James Harden is not going to play for an organization, is not going to show up to training camp, and it seems like the Sixers have a real mess on their hands. And then the domino effect of this is, well, what does this mean for Joel Embiid? This guy just won the MVP. He's never been to a conference finals. He's had a clown show organization around him with just, Ben Simmons, burner account GMs, all this silly sauce that surrounds James Harden. The only time it's really been serious about winning is when they had Heat star Jimmy Butler. We know that these two are very, very close. We know that Jimmy Butler has rubbed it in the Sixers' face when he's won before. We know that Jimmy Butler and Joel Embiid have flirted on social media. Jimmy basically opening the door for him to come to Miami by saying, I know a place where villains are welcome, because Joel Embiid always ends up as the bad guy. We had Joel Embiid this year have to kind of walk back some comments where he was saying about winning a championship in Philadelphia or somewhere else. And it is going to be interesting to see what are the ramifications of this, because a Sixers team that hasn't been good enough to get to the conference finals now may lose their second or third best player, wherever you want to put Maxey or James Harden. And it seems like a disaster. And it seems like Daryl Morey, may want to even go in the round of getting some picks. But we do know this. Daryl Morey will drag something into the season, and he will let things get awkward. And I think this is a guy that he knows really well. But there was an interesting line in Vince Goodwill's column about this on Yahoo Sports that threw Miami into the mix. And it had to do with all of this drama with James Harden dealing with Joel Embiid. And here's what he writes. He says, the difference is Harden likely knows his standing in the public isn't really going to change, and he doesn't come off like someone who cares if one's opinion of him sinks to lower levels. However, another preseason distraction could turn Commissioner Adam Silver into the shape of a copper and sending reigning MVP over the edge into Morey's office to ask out. Quote, everyone's circling and waiting. The Knicks and Miami are keeping an eye on everything going on and basically hinting the idea that they are seeing if Joel Embiid will ask out and will the Miami Heat pounce on that. So this is interesting for a few reasons, and is a little different than the Damian Lillard thing because, one, the Sixers and Joel Embiid were, I guess you could say, are closer to contending, even though they always get bounced in the second round, closer to contending than the Portland Trail Blazers, who clearly have picked their direction. They're rebuilding. The Sixers have a guy they feel like can carry them to great heights and a good regular season, even with or without James Harden, and probably aren't in the realm of, hey, I just want to start over. I want to go in this direction of revamping things. If it were to get that way, it would be pretty crazy. But Vince does right. Embiid has said all the right things publicly. But there has been some residual fatigue in his 76ers experience. Morey is responsible for only the past few years, but in totality, many around the league believe that Embiid will ask out sooner rather than later, and that a full rebuild is what Morey is covertly hoping for, which would be interesting. See, here's the thing that's always crazy about GMs, right? GMs, what happens when you have a rebuild, right? You get more job security in a lot of ways. It extends the project. When you are allowed to punt on having a star, you're allowed to have 3, 4, 5 years of gathering draft picks, kind of having your own trust the process type of thing. Look at a guy like Danny Ainge. He gets to the Jazz. If he were to go and try and win with Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert, okay, mastermind. Can you do this in a couple of years? You got the pieces. If you can't, then were you ever good at this? No. What do they want to do? Trade guys away so they can start their own little rendition of the organization and have time to get things to where they want it. And that buys you more time. It just does. And so if Daryl Morey looks at this disaster that's in Philadelphia and sees a little bit similar to what went on in Utah, that one guy's clearly disgruntled, the other one, should we trade him while he's a hot commodity, a la the Jazz did with Donovan Mitchell last year, then you can get seemingly a huge haul. I mean, to credit Danny Ainge, even though he's a rat fink, he got a haul for both guys, but you get my point. So Daryl Morey could be looking at this and be like, well, if I keep it like this and I can't win with Joel Embiid, I'm probably going to be out of a job. But if I kick the can, listen, nobody loves rebuilds more than the Sixers and their fans. They're all a bunch of process zombies. I mean, they'd probably be thrilled. So let's just say they do. Let's just say the Miami Heat are really watching this 76ers rebuild. What does that mean? Does that mean that Pat Riley diverts attention from Damian Lillard and shifts it towards the MVP? And the Heat do whatever mechanisms they can to get a heap load of picks, swaps, the whole shebang. And what is the likelihood of that? Because I would say the likelihood of the Miami Heat getting Joel Embiid fresh off this MVP season, what are the chances the Heat could get a Joel Embiid without sending Bam Adebayo? If that was a possibility, I will sit here and hear you out. But there are a couple of things that I'm concerned. Could those two play together? Joel Embiid can certainly hit the three from time to time, but it's not necessarily where you want him. Like, I know from a fan's perspective, whenever I see the Heat play the Sixers, anytime Joel Embiid pulls up for three, I'm thrilled. That's like numero uno playing that team. Oh, Joel Embiid. Same thing with Giannis. Anytime those guys pull up for three, it's kind of become it was a very buzz thing. Like, oh, you want your stars to shoot threes. You want all your stars to shoot threes. But like when you have a big who's that physically imposing and they start shooting threes, okay, maybe there's a game where they can hit 4 of 7 and you just kind of tip the cap. But most of the time you're like, whew, I don't have to bang with them down low and they're not going to get an easy 2 every single time. So I have a couple things that I'm skeptical of. I'm skeptical of the idea that the Heat would trade Bam for Joel Embiid. I think the Heat has this love for Bam and this thought of Bam. It would take something remarkable, I think, for them to move him. So I don't know how likely that is. The only way I could see it happening, and that would be a real conundrum, is if Jimmy Butler really pushed for the Heat to go get Joel Embiid. That he really went to them and said, forget this Tyler Hero nonsense, forget trading for Dame, let's just go. Instead of that, let's make Bam the guy, and we go and trade for Joel. Now, I wouldn't be for that. I love Bam. I wouldn't trade, and I don't think they need to trade him. I don't think he's been the issue of them getting over the hump. Hell, he's been to 3 more conference finals than Joel Embiid has. He has been in more finals than Joel Embiid has. And he has not been the issue in any of their playoff runs. He has not been the shortcoming in any of their NBA Finals runs. And the other thing, on top of that with Joel Embiid, like the body, the moping, the falling, the gets hurt all the time, seems to in every single postseason run. He's a monster. How is that going to age? With Bam, it's like that dude seems like he's built as solidly as possible. Seems like he can go on forever doing that. But I think it would take, like, Jimmy Butler goes to Pat Riley and he goes, I want Joel Embiid. Do what it takes to make it happen. Let's divert off this Damian Lillard thing. But to me, I feel like if you got Damian Lillard on that trio of Jimmy and Bam, and I know in my last video I was talking about the idea that I do think that the Heat are heading towards more of a running it back, at least in the early part of the season. I don't think it feels to me like no major trade is going to happen. And I'm just going on feel, not going on info. Feels to me more like no major trade is going to happen until the middle of the year. But if you're the Heat, do you feel like you got enough of an in on the Dame trade that Dame, Jimmy, Bam works better than Jimmy, Joel, Tyler? If you could get Joel without trading Tyler. Because I do feel like it's going to, you're talking about, I think, a haul. You're talking about a guy who's younger than Damian Lillard. You're talking about a guy who's coming off an MVP season. You're talking about a guy who is in the midst of his contract. So, yeah, I do think it's going to take a lot more. Probably take more than any trade would take anywhere, unless Joel Embiid makes a huge stink and, pulls a fake injury and only says, now, I'm sure Joel Embiid would put a list together. I'm sure Joel Embiid would say, I only want to go to this team and this team and this team. And if that was the Knicks and the Heat, if the Heat put Bam on the table, the Knicks don't have a better trade piece than that. They don't. Picks, whatever. I mean, unless Daryl Morey just wants a gazillion picks, because the Knicks do have a gazillion picks. But as far as player, there's not many teams that can offer up a better trade piece than Bam Adebayo. But again, I'm not for it, and I feel like the Heat would not be for it because I think they just have a real love for Bam Adebayo. The intriguing thing would be, could Bam and Joel play together, though? That would be something that would be interesting. Like imagining Joel being in the middle there with Bam Adebayo just being a roving predator all over the place, doing whatever he does, with Joel kind of just helping all over the place. Man, that thing could be scary. But I do wonder from an offensive standpoint, it does feel like Bam would have to extend his range a little bit. We do know that he's comfortable with that jump shot, but the last time that happened with Joel was with Al Horford, and that wasn't a great basketball fit. It didn't go great together. Like usually it's like you have a guy like Joel, you could have one ball handler, which would, one dominant ball handler on the wing, which would be Jimmy. And then you're going to need some people who can shoot the lights out. So, which we know that he can find shooters. I mean, that's just what they do. But I don't know, man. I'm skeptical that the Sixers are going to get to this point to trade Joel Embiid. I feel like they're going to need this to all really, really be a disaster this year for it to happen. But the Heat being in those rumors, it's got to be Jimmy driven for me to really believe that it would actually happen. Because even Pat, I remember bringing this up recently with Leroy, and he made a good point. He's like, you don't think that Pat Riley would want to go after, the MVP 7'1" monstrosity. Pat Riley always loves anchoring with the big, as opposed to Damian Lillard. And I would say Pat's typically a guy who does love the big. That is true. He does love the big bad guy in the middle. That's Pat Riley's bread and butter. But I also think that basketball wise, I do think things are run from a SPO standpoint, and I do also think that the organization obviously has a lot of respect for a Lillard and thinking what that trio could do together. But look, it's the Heat. They're going to be in any rumor. You see any of these odds that come out, they're going to be in any rumor. So I wasn't necessarily surprised to see a blurb like that, but I would be pretty floored if Joel Embiid ended up on the Heat. I just don't think that I don't think they're going to trade Bam for him. I don't think that that's on the table, and then I just don't know how good a fit he and Joel are together, and I don't know how that would work. So I don't know. It would have to be Butler being the big catalyst behind all of it, that he really wants to play with Joel in Miami again. And would the Heat feel that pressure from Jimmy? That's an interesting thing. I mean, Jimmy gets a lot of special privileges in Miami for sure. And gets the special treatment, the star treatment. A lot of the stuff that they were hesitant, honestly, to give to LeBron, Jimmy gets a lot of that stuff. And I think that it would be interesting to see Jimmy really flexing his influence. Like, look, the last time he did it, he just did it with Kyle Lowry. Would he do it for Joel Embiid? Be interesting. You have to believe that it's probably been talked about amongst them. I mean, if they are friends and they have talked about it, just like we know Bam and Dame have talked about their conundrum, would Jimmy be doing it on the side of Joel Embiid? I wouldn't rule it out.